The gunmetal Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway 3 hours earlier than expected. Kang Min-ho killed the engine and sat in the December darkness, watching snowflakes drift past the ornate windows of his Seoul mansion. Something felt wrong. The house was too bright, too alive for 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, when his wife claimed she'd be attending a charity gala until midnight. He stepped out, his black cashmere coat catching the wind, and that's when he heard it through the partially open window of his own bedroom. His wife's laughter, breathless and intimate, and a man's voice he recognized all too well. Min-ho's jaw clenched, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip. But before he could take another step, a soft hand touched his arm from the shadows near the servants' entrance. "Be quiet," a voice whispered urgently. It was Petra, the housemaid his wife had hired 6 months ago. The young black woman's eyes were wide with fear, but also something else. Determination. She pulled him back into the darkness, her finger pressed to her lips. And in that moment, Min-ho, the most feared Mafia boss in Seoul, did something he rarely did. He listened. Welcome to Afrokorean Central, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Petra's hand trembled as she held Min-ho's arm, guiding him away from the front entrance and toward the side garden where the shadows were thicker. The snow crunched softly beneath their feet, each step measured and calculated. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, the barely contained rage of a man who just had his world tilted on its axis. "Talk," Min-ho commanded, his voice low and deadly. Even in a whisper, it carried the weight of authority that made entire rooms go silent. "And this better be good, or you're fired for touching me." Petra swallowed hard. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times over the past 2 weeks, but now that it was here, the words stuck in her throat. She looked up at him, this man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. Kang Min-ho, 34 years old, ruthless, brilliant, deadly, and she discovered over 6 months of working in his home, desperately lonely. "Your wife," she began, her Nigerian accent thick with emotion. "She's not just cheating on you, sir. She's planning to kill you." The words hung in the frozen air between them like a death sentence. Min-ho's expression didn't change, but Petra saw his pupils dilate, saw the way his breathing shifted, and became more controlled. "Explain everything," he said.
"Now." So she did.
2 weeks ago, Petra had been cleaning the upstairs study, the one Mrs. Kim thought was locked. But Petra had learned early in her employment that in a house this big, there were always spare keys, always ways to access the forgotten corners. She'd been dusting the bookshelf when she heard voices in the adjoining room, Hannah's bedroom, the one she no longer shared with her husband. The walls in old mansions were thick, but the heating vents carried sound like whispered secrets. And what Petra heard made her blood run cold. 3 more weeks, Hannah had said, her voice sharp and calculating. The insurance policy updates on January 1st. Double indemnity. $50 million, Tae-yoon. 50 million, and we can finally be together without hiding. The man's response was eager and hungry. "And you're sure the plan will work?" "Your husband isn't stupid, Hannah. He survived assassination attempts from rival gangs. What makes you think this will be different?" "Because he trusts me," Hannah interrupted, and Petra could hear the smile in her voice. "He doesn't love me, hasn't touched me in over a year, but he trusts me. And that's his weakness. On Christmas Eve, during the annual family gathering, I'll put the antifreeze in his whiskey. Just enough to make it look like a heart attack. The family doctor is already paid off, and you, my darling, will be on a plane to Japan with a perfect alibi." Petra's hands had frozen on the dust cloth as she listened, her heart hammering so hard she thought they might hear it through the walls. "And the maid?" Tae-yoon had asked. "The black girl who's always around, always watching."
What if she notices something?
Hannah had laughed, cold and dismissive. "Petra?
She's nobody.
An immigrant desperate for work. Even if she suspected something, who would believe her over me? Over us? She'll be deported back to Lagos before she could finish making an accusation." Now, standing in the snow-covered garden, Petra watched Min-ho process this information. She'd expected rage, expected him to storm into the house with guns blazing. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "UNESCO, I need you at my location," he said quietly. "Bring the team and bring recording equipment." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "Because I'm about to catch a snake, and I want evidence before I cut off its head." He ended the call and looked at Petra properly for the first time, really studied her. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with rich dark skin that caught the moonlight and eyes that held more courage than most of his trained soldiers. She wore the simple black and white uniform of house staff, but she stood before him without cowering, even though she had every reason to be terrified. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked, his tone less harsh now but still demanding answers. Petra met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "Because I needed proof, sir. And because I needed to know if you were worth saving." The audacity of the statement would have gotten anyone else killed. Instead, Minho felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Respect. And something else he couldn't quite name yet, something that made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. "And?" he asked quietly, stepping closer to her until he could see the frost of her breath in the cold air. "I watched you for 2 weeks, Petra said, her voice steady despite the cold, making her shiver. "I saw how you donate to the children's hospital under fake names. How you paid for your driver's daughter's wedding when he was too proud to ask. How you visit your mother's grave every Sunday, even when you're exhausted from handling whatever darkness your world demands of you." She paused, holding his intense gaze. "So yes, sir. I think you're worth saving." Before Minho could respond, headlights swept across the garden as multiple vehicles pulled up to the property. UNESCO had arrived with 3 other men from Minho's inner circle, all moving like shadows across the snow-covered grounds. They gathered around their boss in the darkness, their expressions grim and focused as professionals who'd handled countless dangerous situations before this one. "What's the play, boss?" UNESCO asked, his eyes cutting to Petra with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "We're going to give my dear wife exactly what she wants," Minho said, and something in his voice made Petra's spine straighten. "We're going to let her think her plan is working perfectly. But first, I need to see it for myself. I need to see the man she chose over me with my own eyes." He turned back toward the house, and this time when he moved, it was with deadly purpose and cold calculation. Petra followed, her heart racing as she realized what he intended to do. The other men flanked them silently, professionals at making themselves invisible when necessary. They entered through the servants' entrance, moving through the kitchen and up the back staircase that the staff used to avoid being seen by the family. Petra led the way, knowing every creaking board and every squeaky hinge after 6 months of learning the mansion's secrets. They reached the second-floor hallway, and she guided them to a door adjacent to the master bedroom. It was a storage closet, rarely used except for seasonal decorations, but it had a connecting door that had been locked from the bedroom side for years. Minho tested the handle and found it locked as expected. He pulled out a small toolkit from inside his coat, another reminder that before he was a Mafia boss, he'd been a soldier in the streets, learning every skill necessary for survival in Seoul's underworld. The lock clicked open in seconds, practiced and smooth. The closet was dark and cramped with all 5 of them squeezed inside, but through the narrow gap in the connecting door, they had a perfect view of the bedroom. And there, in the bed Minho had bought for his wife as an anniversary present 2 years ago, was Hannah wrapped around another man. The man straddling her, his face buried in her neck as she gasped and moaned, was Park Tae-yoon, Minho's cousin, his blood relative. The man he'd trusted as his second-in-command for 8 years, who'd stood beside him through territorial wars and police investigations and family betrayals from outside enemies. The betrayal hit harder than any bullet Minho had ever taken, and he'd been shot 3 times in his life. Petra watched his face in the darkness and saw something break behind his eyes, some final wall of trust crumbling into dust. Without thinking, driven purely by instinct and compassion, she reached out and touched his hand where it gripped the doorframe. Just a brief contact, her fingers brushing his knuckles, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone in witnessing this destruction of everything he believed about loyalty and family. His fingers twitched slightly, Then briefly, so briefly she might have imagined it, they squeezed hers in acknowledgement before releasing. Seo was already recording everything with a small professional camera designed for covert surveillance, capturing every angle and every damning moment. The audio picked up everything with crystal clarity. Hannah's breathless confessions of love to Taeyoon, how she'd never felt this alive with Minho, how marriage to him had been a prison of expensive gifts and empty conversations. Taeyoon's promises of the life they'd build once Minho was dead and buried, how they'd take control of the organization together and rebuild it in their image. The specific details of their murder plan repeated now in the hazy afterglow of their passion, spoken freely because they believed themselves completely safe and unobserved. Christmas Eve, Hannah murmured, trailing her fingers down Taeyoon's chest in a gesture that was both possessive and celebratory. Just 5 more days until we're free. Can you wait 5 more days, my love? I've waited 2 years for this, Taeyoon replied, kissing her deeply enough to make Petra look away out of respect for what little dignity remained in this situation. What's 5 more days to finally be free of him? To have you, and the money and control of everything he built? We'll rebuild the organization, make it ours, make it better than his outdated way of doing things. He never appreciated me, Hannah continued, her voice turning bitter in a way that made Petra's stomach turn. Married me because his mother wanted grandchildren and traditional heirs before she died. But he couldn't even do that right, could he? Too busy with his empire to remember he had a wife waiting at home who needed more than jewelry and empty promises. Minho's jaw clenched so hard that Petra heard his teeth grind together in the darkness. She knew this part was partially true from whispered conversations she'd overheard between other staff members. The marriage had been arranged by Minho's dying mother, a last wish he'd granted out of filial duty rather than love. But knowing your marriage was broken and watching your wife celebrate your planned murder with your own cousin were 2 entirely different kinds of pain that cut in ways bullets never could. Got enough footage? Minho whispered to Seo, his voice barely audible but carrying an edge sharp enough to draw blood. More than enough, boss, Seo confirmed quietly, checking the camera's display. This would hold up in any court, legal or otherwise. We have audio, video, conspiracy to commit murder, the insurance fraud angle, all of it documented with timestamps. Good, Minho said flatly, his expression carved from ice and rage. Let's go before I forget every lesson about patience my father ever taught me. They filed out silently, retracing their steps down the servant stairs and out into the December night that seemed even colder now than before. Minho didn't speak until they were in his private study, a room in the east wing of the mansion far from the master bedroom where he usually worked late into the night going over accounts and strategies for his various business operations. The study was masculine and efficient, all dark wood and leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with books in Korean, English, and Japanese. A massive desk that had belonged to his father dominated the center of the room, and this was where Minho felt most himself, most in control of the chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed world. He poured himself a whiskey from the crystal decanter on the side table, then paused with a glass halfway to his lips, looking at the amber liquid with new eyes that saw potential poison in everything now. Could he ever trust a drink in his own home again after learning what his wife had planned? He set the glass down untasted. The sound of crystal meeting would unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Sir, Seo began carefully, his tone respectful but urgent. Your orders? What do you want us to do with this information? Nothing yet, Minho said, his voice cold and controlled in a way that made everyone in the room stand straighter. We play this smart and calculated. Petra said Christmas Eve, which gives us 5 days to plan every detail perfectly. I want to know everything about their conspiracy. How long has this affair been going on? Who else in my organization knows about it and stayed silent? Where's the money trail for paying off doctors and setting up offshore accounts? The doctor Hannah mentioned in her pillow talk, find him and make him understand that cooperation is his only path to survival, Minho continued, his mind already working through scenarios and contingencies. The insurance policy she referenced, verify every detail, and find out who helped her set it up. I want every single detail of their murder plan mapped out before we make our move, every person involved identified and assessed. And them? One of the other men asked, jerking his head back toward the bedroom wing where the conspirators likely still lay tangled together in post-coital bliss. What about your wife and Taeyoon? They continue exactly as they are, Min-ho said, and his smile was cold enough to frost the windows. Hannah suspects nothing. Taeyoon suspects nothing about our knowledge. Let them think they're clever and careful. Let them think they're winning this game. He leaned back against his desk, arms crossed over his chest. The best traps are the ones the prey walks into willingly, believing themselves the hunters instead of the hunted. The men nodded in understanding and began to file out of the study, already making quiet phone calls and sending encrypted messages to set their investigation in motion. Yoon paused at the door, his expression concerned as he glanced back at his boss. "And the girl?" he asked, nodding toward Petra, who'd been standing quietly by the bookshelf trying to make herself invisible and unobtrusive. "What do you want done about her involvement in all this?" Min-ho looked at Petra, really studied her this time with eyes that saw beyond the maid's uniform to the woman underneath. "The girl saved my life by risking her own safety and immigration status," he said firmly. "She stays close to me where I can ensure her protection. I want her guarded at all times, but discreetly. No one threatens her or questions her loyalty. Is that understood?" Yoon nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Understood, boss." After the door closed behind them, heavy silence fell over the study like a weighted blanket. Petra shifted uncomfortably near the bookshelf, suddenly very aware that she was alone with one of Seoul's most dangerous men in a room that probably held more secrets than she could imagine. She was just a maid, an outsider, a foreign worker in a country that sometimes made her feel welcome and sometimes made her feel like an eternal curiosity. And now she was tangled in the deadly world of Korean organized crime, having saved the life of a man whose reputation made hardened criminals cross the street to avoid him. "You should sit," Min-ho said quietly, gesturing to one of the expensive leather chairs positioned in front of his desk. His tone was different now, less commanding and more something else she couldn't quite identify. "I'm staff, sir," Petra replied automatically, years of service training making her hesitate. "I shouldn't presume to sit in your private study like an equal." "Sit," he repeated, and this time the command in his voice left absolutely no room for argument or discussion. Petra sat carefully on the edge of the chair, perching like a bird ready for flight if necessary. Her hands folded in her lap, and she kept her eyes downcast in a gesture of respect she'd learned was important in Korean culture. Min-ho poured another whiskey, then paused and looked at her questioningly. "Do you drink alcohol?" "Not really, sir," she admitted honestly. "My mother raised me to be careful about such things, especially in unfamiliar situations." "Smart woman, your mother," he said with something that might have been approval. He set the bottle down and moved to a small refrigerator hidden in the wall paneling, pulling out 2 bottles of water instead. He handed her one, then took one for himself before settling into the chair across from her rather than behind his imposing desk. The gesture felt significant somehow, like he was trying to put them on more equal footing despite the vast differences in their positions and power. "Tell me about yourself," he said after taking a long drink of water. "And please don't call me sir in every sentence like I'm some kind of emperor. My name is Min-ho, and I think after what we just witnessed together, we're well past rigid formalities." Petra couldn't help it despite the tension and fear still coursing through her system. She smiled, small and fleeting but genuine. It felt strange and almost wrong to smile after everything, but his matter-of-fact tone made it impossible not to respond to the slight warmth beneath his icy exterior. "Okay," she said, testing the feel of his name on her tongue. Min-ho. His name felt intimate somehow, like she was crossing an invisible line that separated staff from family, outsiders from trusted inner circle. "I'm from Lagos, Nigeria," she began, her accent becoming slightly thicker as she relaxed fractionally. "I came to Korea 3 years ago to study international business at Seoul National University. I fell in love with everything about this country. The culture, the food, the way tradition and modernity exist side by side, the kindness of people who took time to help a confused foreign student find her way around the city. But my student visa was running out after graduation, and I needed a work sponsor to stay legally, Petra continued, her voice growing quieter. Your wife, she paused, the word tasting bitter now after everything. Hannah hired me 6 months ago through an agency that specializes in placing international staff. The pay was generous, the visa sponsorship was legitimate and processed quickly, and I truly thought it was a blessing from God. A chance to build a life here in Seoul, maybe eventually bring my younger siblings over for education opportunities. And instead you walked into a conspiracy to commit murder, Min-ho finished for her, his tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. Instead of a blessing, you found yourself in the middle of a nightmare involving people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate you if they suspected you knew their secrets. Yes, Petra whispered, fear creeping back into her voice as the reality of her situation fully hit her. They talked about deporting me like I'm nothing, like my life and dreams don't matter at all. Like I'm just an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. You could have stayed quiet, Min-ho said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his intense gaze pinning her in place. You could have kept your head down, collected your generous pay, kept your visa sponsorship secure, and let nature take its course with my murder. No one would have blamed you for choosing self-preservation over getting involved in something this dangerous. Why risk absolutely everything for a stranger whose world you don't understand? Petra thought about all the reasons and justifications she'd told herself over the past 2 weeks while wrestling with this impossible decision. She thought about the pragmatic choice versus the moral one, about self-interest versus doing what was right regardless of personal cost. But in the end, her answer came down to something her mother had taught her long before she ever dreamed of leaving Nigeria. Because it was wrong, she said quietly but firmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. What they're planning is evil, and I couldn't live with myself if I let it happen when I had the power to prevent it. My mother always said that silence in the face of evil makes you complicit in it, makes you just as guilty as the person wielding the weapon. And I couldn't be complicit in murder, not even to protect my own comfort and security. Something shifted in Min-ho's expression at her words, not quite softening but warming somehow, like ice beginning to thaw under unexpected sunlight. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman with strong moral principles. She was, Petra said, her voice catching slightly with grief that was still relatively fresh. She passed away 2 years ago from cancer. It's part of why I'm so desperate to make something of myself here, to prove her sacrifices for my education weren't wasted. I'm sorry for your loss, Min-ho said, and the sincerity in his tone surprised her. Losing a parent changes you in ways people who haven't experienced it can never fully understand. They sat in silence for a moment, two people from completely different worlds bound together by circumstances neither had chosen, both carrying grief and secrets that shaped who they'd become. What happens now? Petra finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. Now we plan carefully and methodically, Min-ho replied, some of the cold calculation returning to his voice and expression. We gather irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy. And on Christmas Eve, when my dear wife thinks she's about to become a wealthy widow and run off with my cousin, we spring the trap and watch their entire world collapse. But until then, you need to act completely normal around both of them.
Can you do that?
Can you serve Hannah breakfast, press her clothes, smile, and nod while she gives you orders? All while knowing she's planning to murder me, and then have you deported to eliminate a potential witness? Petra nodded slowly, squaring her shoulders with determination. I've been doing exactly that for 2 weeks already, ever since I overheard their plan. I can continue for 5 more days if it means stopping them and saving your life. This is different now, though, Min-ho said, his voice taking on an edge of warning. Before, they didn't know that you knew their secrets. Now I'm home and aware of everything, which changes the dynamic completely. You'll see me every day, have to interact with me in front of Hannah, and you'll have to pretend you don't know what you know while watching them pretend their marriage and loyalty are real. You'll have to serve dinner to people planning murder, press clothes for a woman who sees you as disposable trash, smile at a man who's betraying his own blood family for money and lust. Can you really do that without breaking, without giving something away in your expression or behavior? The intensity in his voice and the way he leaned closer sent shivers down Petra's spine despite the warmth of the study. This was the Mafia boss everyone in Seoul feared and respected, the man who'd built an empire on steel will and calculated ruthlessness. But beneath that, she also saw something else. Concern for her safety, recognition of the burden he was asking her to carry, respect for her courage even though it put her in more danger. "Yes," Petra said firmly, her voice steady and sure. "I can do that. I will do that. Because you're worth saving, Minho, and I don't regret my choice to help you no matter what comes next." "Good," he said, standing up in a smooth motion that spoke of controlled power. "It's late now, and tomorrow we both need to act like nothing has changed. Get some rest, and tomorrow everything continues exactly as it always has on the surface." Petra stood as well and moved toward the study door, but she paused with her hand on the polished brass handle, turning back to look at him one more time. "Minho?"
she said softly.
"Yes," he replied, already moving toward his desk where papers and reports waited for his attention despite the late hour and emotional trauma of the evening. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with compassion. "Sorry about your wife's betrayal and your cousin's disloyalty. I'm sorry you're going through this pain and that people you trusted turned out to be planning your destruction. No one deserves that kind of betrayal from the people closest to them." For a long moment, Minho didn't respond, his back to her as he stood perfectly still. Then his voice came, quiet and raw in a way she suspected few people ever heard from him. "So am I," he admitted. "So am I." Petra slipped out of the study and made her way through the quiet mansion to the small room in the servants' wing that had been her home for 6 months. She changed into her nightclothes mechanically, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened in just a few short hours. She'd come to work this morning as a simple housemaid worried about visa paperwork and homesick for Lagos. Now she was a key witness in a murder conspiracy, under the protection of a mafia boss, and somehow feeling a connection to Minho that went beyond simple employer and employee dynamics. That connection terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, made her pulse race whenever he looked at her with those intense eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd ever built. The next morning arrived too quickly for Petra's exhausted mind. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning while replaying the events in the storage closet, seeing Hannah and Taeyun together, watching Minho's face as his world shattered. But when her alarm went off at 5 in the morning as it always did, she forced herself up and into her uniform, pinning her hair back neatly and checking her reflection to make sure nothing in her expression would give away the secrets she now carried. She made her way to the kitchen where the other staff were already beginning preparations for the family's breakfast. The head cook, an older Korean woman named Mrs. Park who'd worked for the Kim family for 20 years, looked up as Petra entered.
"Good
morning," she said in accented English she'd learned specifically to communicate with Petra. "You look tired today. Everything okay in your room?" "Just couldn't sleep well," Petra replied with a practiced smile. "Too much on my mind about the holidays coming and missing my family back home." Mrs. Park nodded sympathetically and handed Petra a tray. "Madam Kim wants her breakfast in the sunroom this morning. The usual, with extra fruit." Petra's hands only shook slightly as she prepared Hannah's breakfast tray, arranging everything perfectly as she'd been trained. Fresh fruit, imported yogurt, green tea prepared exactly how Hannah preferred it, toast with the specific jam she liked. Every detail had to be perfect because Hannah noticed and commented on every tiny flaw or deviation from her exacting standards. Petra carried the tray through the mansion's hallways, her steps measured and professional, passing expensive artwork and sculptures that cost more than her family would earn in 10 years. She reached the sunroom where morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and there sat Hannah, looking absolutely radiant in a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled even this early, every inch the beautiful socialite wife of a powerful man. "Good morning, Petra," Hannah said with a smile that would have seemed warm if Petra didn't now know the rot underneath. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you, madam." Petra lied smoothly, setting the breakfast tray down on the small table. "Is there anything else you need this morning?" Hannah picked up a strawberry, examining it critically before taking a delicate bite. Actually, yes, she said thoughtfully. I'll need you to pick up my dress from the boutique this afternoon. The red one I ordered for the Christmas Eve party. It needs to be perfect for tomorrow night's celebration. Of course, madam, Petra replied, her stomach churning at the knowledge of what Hannah really planned for tomorrow night's party. The murder of her husband disguised as a tragic medical emergency during a family celebration. I'll make sure to collect it before 3 o'clock. Perfect, Hannah said, dismissing her with a wave of her manicured hand. You're such a reliable girl, Petra. I don't know what I'd do without your help managing the household. You're very kind, madam, Petra managed, bowing slightly before leaving the sunroom with her empty hands clenched into fists. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of household duties and carefully maintained normalcy. Petra cleaned, organized, ran errands, and interacted with the other staff, while constantly aware of the secrets burning in her chest. Around noon, Minho emerged from his study where he'd apparently worked through the night. He looked tired but impeccably dressed, as always, in a dark suit that probably cost more than Petra's annual salary. Their eyes met briefly across the main hallway, and something passed between them. Recognition, shared knowledge, a connection neither could acknowledge openly. Then he was past her, heading out for whatever business required his attention in the middle of the day, leaving Petra to wonder if she'd imagined the warmth in his gaze. That afternoon, following Hannah's instructions, Petra took a car service to the exclusive boutique in Gangnam where Seoul's wealthiest women shopped. She collected the red dress, an incredibly expensive designer piece that hugged every curve and sparkled with thousands of tiny crystals. Hannah would look stunning in it tomorrow night when she planned to poison her husband, would play the perfect hostess before committing cold-blooded murder. The thought made Petra sick to her stomach, but she carefully carried the dress back to the mansion and hung it in Hannah's walk-in closet as instructed. Later that evening, after dinner had been served and cleaned up, Petra was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Park prepare ingredients for the next day when one of Minho's men appeared in the doorway. Petra, he said quietly in English, his accent thick but understandable. Boss wants to see you in his study.
Now.
Petra's heart jumped into her throat, but she kept her expression neutral. She wiped her hands on a towel and followed the man through the mansion's hallways to the east wing. He knocked once on the study door, received a response in Korean, and gestured for Petra to enter before disappearing back down the hall. Petra stepped into the study and found Minho standing by the window overlooking the snow-covered gardens, a glass of whiskey in his hand this time. He'd apparently decided he wasn't going to let fear control every aspect of his life, though she noticed he'd poured the drink himself from a sealed bottle rather than accepting anything prepared by someone else. "Close the door," he said without turning around. His voice sounded tired, weighed down by something more than just lack of sleep. Petra did as instructed and stood uncertainly near the bookshelf, waiting for him to speak or give her some indication of why he'd summoned her. When Minho finally turned to face her, she was struck by how different he looked compared to this morning. The cold, controlled mask had slipped slightly, revealing the man underneath who was dealing with betrayal and pain that cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. "I've spent the day reviewing the evidence UNESCO gathered," he said quietly, moving to sit in one of the leather chairs and gesturing for her to take the other. "The affair has been going on for 18 months. Taeyun has been embezzling from my organization for almost as long, small amounts at first but getting bolder over time. The doctor they mentioned is real, corrupt, and already accepted a substantial payment to falsify my death certificate when the time came. The insurance policy is legitimate and massive, with Hannah as the sole beneficiary, updated 3 months ago with double indemnity clauses. They've been planning this for a very long time, being patient and careful, waiting for the perfect opportunity." Petra sat down slowly, her hands gripping the chair arms as she processed the scope of the conspiracy. "All of this has been going on under your roof, under your nose, involving people you trusted completely," she said softly. "How are you holding up emotionally?" "That's actually why I called you here," Minho admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice surprised her. "Everyone else in my organization, they see me as the boss, the leader who has to be strong and controlled and strategic at all times. I can't show weakness in front of them because weakness in my world gets you killed or overthrown. But you, he paused, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You've seen me at my lowest moment already, watching my wife betray me with my own cousin, witnessing my world crumble. And somehow you're still here, still looking at me like I'm a human being worth saving instead of just a powerful man to fear or manipulate. So I'm asking you honestly, how do I survive this? How do I get through the next few days pretending everything is normal when I want to burn this entire mansion down with both of them trapped inside? Petra's heart broke for him in that moment, seeing past the reputation and power to the lonely man who'd been betrayed by everyone he should have been able to trust. She stood up from her chair and moved closer to him, kneeling down beside his chair so she could look up into his face, see the pain he was trying so hard to hide from everyone else. You survive it by remembering that you're better than they are, she said gently but firmly. You survive it by not letting their evil turn you into something you'll hate seeing in the mirror later. Your wife and cousin chose cruelty and murder, but you're choosing justice and strategy. That difference matters, Min-ho. That's what makes you worth saving instead of just another monster in expensive clothes. His hand came up slowly, hesitantly, and his fingers brushed against her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her throat tighten. When did you become my conscience? He asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. When I decided you were worth fighting for, Petra replied honestly, her own voice shaking slightly as she acknowledged the feelings growing between them despite the impossible circumstances. They stayed like that for a long moment, her kneeling beside his chair and him touching her face like she was something precious and fragile. The air between them charged with awareness and connection that went far beyond employer and employee, beyond witness and protected person. This was something else entirely, something neither of them had names for yet, but both felt pulling them together like gravity or fate. Then Min-ho seemed to remember himself and the boundaries that should exist between them. He pulled his hand back and stood up abruptly, putting distance between them. You should go get some rest, he said, his voice returning to something more controlled and professional. Tomorrow will be difficult, and Christmas Eve will be even worse. I need you sharp and ready to help me spring this trap on people who think they've won. Petra stood as well, trying not to feel the loss of his touch like a physical ache. Of course, she said, moving toward the door. But Min-ho, she added, turning back one more time. Yes. Thank you for trusting me enough to show me the real you, the man behind the reputation. That trust means more than you probably realize. She slipped out before he could respond, but she felt his eyes on her all the way to the door and beyond. The next day passed in similar fashion, all surface normalcy, hiding deadly undercurrents. Petra performed her duties while Hannah made final preparations for tomorrow night's Christmas Eve party, completely oblivious to the trap being set around her. Min-ho came and went, his interactions with Petra brief and professional in front of others, but carrying weight and meaning she felt in every glance and gesture. That night, unable to sleep again, Petra found herself wandering the mansion's hallways long after everyone else had gone to bed. She moved quietly through the shadows, her bare feet silent on the marble floors as she made her way past sleeping rooms and darkened corridors. She wasn't sure where she was going until she found herself standing outside Min-ho's study, seeing lights still glowing beneath the door at 2 a.m. She knocked softly, barely loud enough to hear, half hoping he wouldn't answer so she could retreat to her room without explaining why she'd sought him out in the middle of the night. But the door opened immediately, and Min-ho stood there in shirt sleeves with his tie loosened and exhaustion written across his features. Petra, he said, surprise and something else flickering in his dark eyes. What are you doing awake at this hour? Is something wrong? I couldn't sleep, she admitted, suddenly feeling foolish for coming here. I kept thinking about tomorrow night, about everything that could go wrong, about Hannah and Tae-yoon, and whether we've really thought of every possible outcome and contingency. Min-ho stepped back, silently inviting her into the study. She entered, and he closed the door behind her before moving to pour 2 glasses of water from the pitcher on his desk. They'd fallen into this pattern over the past few days, These late-night conversations where walls came down and truths were spoken that neither would acknowledge in daylight. Here, Petra said what she really thought without fear of deportation or dismissal, and Minho showed vulnerability he couldn't reveal to anyone else in his dangerous world. "I've been going over the same concerns," Minho admitted, handing her a glass and gesturing toward the chairs they now thought of as theirs. "UNSO has positioned men throughout the house and grounds. Detective Shin will be attending the party in plain clothes, a legitimate officer of the law who owes me a favor and has agreed to witness everything that happens tomorrow night. We have cameras positioned to capture every angle and recording devices that will pick up every word spoken. The trap is set as perfectly as possible, but you're right to worry. In my experience, even the best plans can go sideways in unpredictable ways when human emotion enters the equation." They sat together in the comfortable silence they developed, both lost in thoughts about tomorrow and what it would mean when everything came to light. Petra studied Minho's profile in the soft lamplight, noting the sharp angles of his face and the way stress had carved new lines around his eyes in just a few short days. He was handsome in a dangerous way, the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about, powerful and controlled and wrapped in darkness that should terrify her. But somehow it didn't, because she'd seen the other side of him that he kept hidden from the world. The man who visited his mother's grave faithfully, who donated anonymously to children's hospitals, who looked at her like she was the only real thing in his carefully constructed life of lies and power plays. Minho must have felt her gaze because he turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Petra replied honestly. 6 months ago, I was just a desperate graduate trying to find a way to stay in Korea legally, willing to take any job that would sponsor my visa. I never imagined I'd end up here in the middle of a murder conspiracy, sitting in a Mafia boss's study at 2 in the morning, talking like we're old friends instead of employer and employee. And I never imagined I'd meet someone like you," Minho said, leaning forward slightly with intensity burning in his dark eyes. "Someone brave enough to risk everything for a stranger, someone who sees past my reputation and power to the man underneath, someone who makes me want to be better than what my world demands. You terrify me, Petra. Not because you're dangerous, but because you make me feel things I thought I'd buried so deep they could never surface again. You make me want things I have no right to want, things that could get you killed in my world just by association." Petra's breath caught in her throat as the truth hung between them, undeniable and dangerous. "What kind of things?" she whispered, even though she already knew, had felt the same pull between them growing stronger with each passing day. "This kind of thing," Minho said, and then he was moving, closing the distance between them and cupping her face in his hands with a gentleness that contradicted everything his reputation suggested about him. His lips met hers in a kiss that started soft and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away and reject what he was offering. But Petra didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hands gripping his shoulders as she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion and attraction she'd been trying to deny since the moment she'd first touched his arm in the garden and whispered for him to be quiet. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent and desperate as days of tension and fear and connection finally found an outlet. Minho pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist as she slid from her chair onto his lap, their bodies pressed together in a way that made rational thought impossible. His hands moved over her back, her sides, touching her like she was precious and desired and everything he'd been denying himself. Petra's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing to feel every point of contact between them as heat built in her core and spread through her entire body. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together as they tried to process what had just happened and what it meant for both of them. "I shouldn't have done that," Minho said, though his arms didn't loosen their hold on her. "You work for me, you're under my protection, and I just crossed every professional boundary that should exist between us. I took advantage of the situation and your vulnerability. I'm sorry, Petra. I should be stronger than this, more controlled." "Don't apologize," Petra said firmly, pulling back enough to look into his eyes. Don't you dare apologize for being human and feeling something real in the middle of all this darkness and betrayal surrounding us. I kissed you back, Minho. I wanted this just as much as you did, maybe more. This wasn't you taking advantage. This was two people who've been dancing around their attraction finally being honest about it. But the timing is terrible, Minho said, though his hands were still stroking her back in a way that contradicted his words. Tomorrow night, I'm confronting my wife and cousin about their plan to murder me. My life is violence and danger and constantly looking over my shoulder for the next threat. What kind of future could I possibly offer you beyond more fear and uncertainty? Maybe I don't care about perfect timing or safe futures, Petra replied, her hand moving to touch his face the way he'd touched hers so many times. Maybe I care about the man who visits his mother's grave every Sunday, who protects his people fiercely, who's trying to handle betrayal with justice instead of revenge. Maybe I care about you, Minho, dangerous world and all. The words hung between them, too honest and too soon, but undeniably true. Minho pulled her close again, burying his face in her neck and just holding her like she was an anchor keeping him from drowning in the chaos of his life. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the study while the city slept outside and tomorrow's confrontation loomed ever closer. Eventually, reluctantly, Minho pulled back and looked at her with eyes full of conflict and desire and something that might have been hope. You should go back to your room, he said softly. Not because I want you to leave, but because if you stay here much longer, I won't be able to let you go at all. And we both need to be rested and focused for tomorrow night. Everything depends on keeping our heads clear and our emotions controlled when the trap springs shut. Petra nodded, understanding even though every part of her wanted to stay right here in his arms where the world outside couldn't touch them. She slid off his lap and stood, straightening her nightclothes and trying to calm her racing heart. Minho stood as well, walking her to the door with his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. At the door, he stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. Petra, whatever happens tomorrow night, whatever chaos erupts when Hannah and Taeyun realize their plan has been exposed, I need you to promise me something. Anything, she said, turning to face him fully. Promise me you'll stay safe, he said intensely, both hands gripping her shoulders now. Promise me that if things get violent or dangerous, you'll get out of the house immediately and let Yunesio take you somewhere secure. I can handle my wife and cousin and whatever consequences come from exposing their conspiracy, but I can't handle it if you get hurt because I pulled you into my world. I can't lose you, Petra. Not now, not when I've just found you. I promise, she said, reaching up to touch his face one more time, memorizing the feel of his skin under her fingers. I'll be careful and smart, and I'll trust your people to keep me safe if things go wrong. But Minho, you need to promise me something too. What's that? Promise me you'll survive tomorrow night, she said, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. Promise me you won't do anything reckless or self-destructive. Promise me that after all this is over, we'll have a chance to figure out what this is between us without murder plots and betrayal hanging over our heads. I promise, Minho said, and then he kissed her again, softer this time, but no less meaningful. I'll survive, and we'll figure this out together, whatever it takes. Petra reluctantly left the study and made her way back to her small room in the servants' wing. She climbed into bed but didn't sleep, instead lying awake replaying the feel of Minho's lips on hers, his hands on her body, the way he'd looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking his whole life. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and danger and the exposure of terrible secrets. But it would also bring the possibility of something new, something real between two people who'd found each other in the most unexpected and impossible circumstances. She just had to survive whatever Christmas Eve would bring. The next morning dawned cold and clear, Christmas Eve arriving with deceptive innocence and beauty. Petra woke early after her few hours of restless sleep and immediately began preparations for the evening's party. The mansion buzzed with activity as caterers arrived, florists delivered elaborate arrangements, and staff members rushed around ensuring every detail would be perfect for the annual Kim family Christmas celebration. Hannah was in her element, directing everyone with imperious gestures and demanding perfection in every tiny detail. She wore an elegant cream dress for the daytime preparations, her hair and makeup already flawless even though the party wouldn't begin for another 10 hours. She looked like the perfect society wife, gracious and beautiful, giving absolutely no indication that she planned to commit murder before the night ended. Petra, Hannah called out as Petra passed through the main hall carrying linens for the dining room. I need you to set up the whiskey station in the library. Minho always has a special whiskey there during parties, and I want everything arranged perfectly. The specific bottle is in the locked cabinet, you know the one. Use the crystal glasses from the top shelf, and make sure there's ice in the silver bucket. Every detail must be perfect tonight. Of course, madam, Petra replied, her stomach churning because she knew exactly why Hannah wanted that particular setup. The whiskey station would be where Hannah planned to poison Minho's drink, probably during the traditional midnight toast when everyone would be gathered and distracted by celebration. Petra made her way to the library, a masculine room filled with leather-bound books and comfortable chairs where Minho often retreated when he needed to think. She found the locked cabinet Hannah had mentioned and used the key from the household key ring to open it. Inside was an expensive bottle of whiskey, probably aged 30 years or more, the kind of liquor that cost thousands of dollars and represented status and taste. She carefully carried it to the side table and arranged everything exactly as Hannah had instructed, all while knowing that Minho and his team had already planned for this exact scenario. The whiskey would be switched, the glasses would be monitored, and every moment would be recorded by hidden cameras that had been installed throughout the mansion over the past few days. Around noon, Minho returned from whatever business had taken him out of the house. Petra saw him arrive from a window, watched as he climbed out of his car with Eunicio and two other men flanking him, all of them looking serious and focused as they entered through the front door. Minho's eyes found Petra immediately across the crowded entrance hall, and something passed between them. Readiness, determination, a silent reminder of last night's kiss and the promises they'd made to each other. Then he was past her, heading upstairs to change for the evening, playing his role as the unsuspecting husband perfectly. The afternoon passed in a blur of final preparations. The house was transformed into a winter wonderland with white flowers, twinkling lights, evergreen garlands, and elegant decorations that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The dining room table was set for 30 people with china and crystal that had been in the Kim family for generations. Everything looked beautiful and festive and completely at odds with the darkness that would be exposed before the night ended. As the sun began to set and the first guests started arriving, Petra changed into her formal serving uniform, a more elegant version of her everyday clothes designed for special occasions when staff needed to be present but unobtrusive during high society events. She pinned her hair back neatly and checked her appearance one final time, noting the exhaustion in her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. Tonight would change everything for all of them, one way or another. She made her way downstairs and joined the other staff members who would be circulating through the party with trays of champagne and appetizers. Mrs. Park pulled her aside briefly with a concerned expression. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked quietly in her accented English. "You've seemed very stressed these past few days, not yourself at all." "I'm fine," Petra assured her with a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just nervous about the party going well and making sure I don't make any mistakes in front of all these important guests." Mrs. Park patted her arm sympathetically. "You'll do wonderfully. You always do. Just remember to smile and stay calm, and everything will be fine." If only she knew how wrong that prediction would be. Guests began arriving in earnest around 7, all dressed in expensive evening wear and dripping with jewelry that represented obscene wealth and status. Petra recognized some faces from news reports and society pages, politicians and business leaders, and people whose names carried weight in Seoul's upper echelons. They mingled in the main hall and adjoining rooms, drinking champagne and making small talk while soft music played in the background. Hannah held court like a queen, greeting everyone with practiced charm and warmth that seemed so genuine it made Petra's skin crawl. She wore the red dress Petra had picked up from the boutique yesterday, and it was stunning on her, making her look like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. No one looking at her would ever suspect she was capable of cold-blooded murder, which was probably exactly the point. Minho arrived fashionably late to his own party, descending the grand staircase in a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look dangerous and powerful and completely in control. The room seemed to shift when he entered, everyone gravitating toward him, seeking his attention and approval because power recognized power, even in social settings. His eyes found Petra across the crowded room, and for just a moment, the cold mask slipped enough for her to see the real man underneath. Then he was surrounded by guests, shaking hands and accepting greetings, playing his role perfectly while everyone remained oblivious to the trap that was set and waiting. Taeyoon was also there, of course, standing at Minho's side and playing the loyal cousin role to perfection. He made jokes and poured drinks and laughed too loudly, and Petra wanted to scream at everyone to look closer, to see the betrayal written in his eyes for anyone who knew what to look for. But they didn't see it because they didn't want to see it, didn't want to believe that someone so charming and familiar could be planning such evil. Petra circulated through the crowd with a tray of champagne glasses, offering drinks and smiling politely while her heart hammered against her ribs. She caught glimpses of Yoon stationed near the entrance, and she spotted Detective Shin pretending to be just another wealthy guest, both of them watching and waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. At 9 o'clock, Hannah called for everyone's attention, and the crowd quieted as she stood beside the elaborate Christmas tree that dominated one corner of the main hall. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate the holidays with us," she began, her voice carrying perfectly through the space. Christmas has always been special to the Kim family. Minho's mother, may she rest in peace, loved this season and the tradition of gathering loved ones together. She believed in family, in loyalty, in celebrating what truly matters in life. The irony of her words, given what she was planning, was so thick Petra could barely breathe through it. Hannah gestured for Minho to join her by the tree, and he moved through the crowd to stand beside his wife, accepting a glass of champagne from her perfectly manicured hand. Petra's pulse skyrocketed, because this was it. This was the moment Hannah had chosen to make her move. But before Hannah could do anything, Yoon was there, smooth as silk, accidentally bumping into her just hard enough to cause a brief moment of confusion. Glasses were jostled, positions shifted slightly, and when everything settled, Minho was holding a different glass than the one Hannah had given him. The poison glass was now in Yoon's hand, switched so smoothly that Petra wasn't even sure she'd seen it happen. Hannah didn't notice anything wrong, too focused on her performance and the crowd watching them. "To family," Hannah said, raising her glass with a smile that would have fooled anyone who didn't know better. "To tradition and loyalty, and to the year ahead, and all it holds for us." "To family," the room echoed dutifully, raising their own glasses in the traditional toast. Minho raised his glass as well, but didn't drink from it. Instead, before anyone could take that first sip, he spoke. "Actually, before we toast, I have something important to say. Something everyone here needs to witness." Hannah's smile flickered just slightly, a crack in her perfect facade. "Darling, maybe this can wait until after the toast? We have guests waiting." "No," Minho said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade made of ice. "This can't wait another moment. In fact, this is the perfect time, because I want all these witnesses here to see the truth." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Minho's tone registered with the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably, confused by the sudden tension crackling through what had been a pleasant holiday gathering just moments ago. "You talk about family and loyalty, Hannah," Minho continued, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of fury that made everyone go still and silent. "You mentioned my mother and her belief in tradition. Do you know what she believed in most? What she taught me from the time I was old enough to understand." The room had gone deathly silent now, everyone frozen and watching this confrontation unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Loyalty above all else," Minho said, each word precise and controlled. She believed that family meant protecting each other, trusting each other completely, standing together against any threat from outside. She believed that betrayal was the worst possible sin, worse than any crime or weakness. She believed that traitors deserved no mercy, no second chances, only justice delivered swiftly and publicly so everyone would understand the price of breaking sacred bonds. Hannah's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Min-ho, what are you talking about? Her voice shook slightly despite her attempt to maintain composure. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should sit down before making speeches. Tell me, wife, Min-ho said, holding up his champagne glass so it caught the light. What's really in this drink you just handed me? What did you think I would toast with tonight? It's champagne, Hannah said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Obviously, it's just champagne. What else would it be? Why don't we have it tested and find out? Min-ho gestured, and Yoon-seo stepped forward with a small testing device that he'd been carrying concealed. He took the glass that Hannah had originally given Min-ho, the one he'd switched during the deliberate collision, and dipped a chemical test strip into the liquid. The room watched in breathless silence as the strip changed color, and Yoon-seo held it up for everyone to see. Ethylene glycol, Yoon-seo announced clearly. Antifreeze in a concentration high enough to kill a man within 12 hours. Symptoms would mimic a heart attack, making it look like natural causes to anyone not looking closely enough or anyone who'd been paid to falsify a death certificate. The room erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. People backed away from Hannah like she was radioactive, their faces showing disbelief and horror as they processed what had just been revealed. You're insane, Hannah hissed, her composure shattering completely. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Min-ho, but this is ridiculous. I would never poison anyone, especially not my own husband. This is some kind of setup, some mistake with the testing equipment. No games and no mistakes, Min-ho said coldly. Just truth and evidence and justice for conspiracy to commit murder. He gestured again, and suddenly the wall behind the Christmas tree lit up with a projected image. A screen descended from the ceiling, and video began to play for all the shocked guests to witness. Hannah and Tae-yoon in bed together, their passionate affair captured in humiliating detail. Audio of their conversations planning Min-ho's murder down to the smallest detail, discussing the insurance money and their plans to run away together. Financial records showing Tae-yoon's embezzlement from the organization, money funneled into offshore accounts in preparation for their escape. The doctor's testimony, already recorded after Yoon-seo had paid him a very persuasive visit, admitting he'd been paid to falsify the death certificate when the time came. Every damning detail was displayed for all these powerful witnesses to see, an entire conspiracy exposed in brutal, undeniable clarity. Hannah's face went from pale to gray as she watched her secrets revealed to everyone who mattered in Seoul's high society. Tae-yoon tried to run, actually turned and bolted for the exit like a coward, but two of Min-ho's men were already positioned there, blocking his escape route with crossed arms and cold expressions. You planned this, Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at Min-ho with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You knew everything, and you let me think I was winning. You let me walk right into this trap. I learned from the best, Min-ho replied, his voice carrying just enough satisfaction to cut. You taught me that the people closest to you are often the most dangerous. The ones you trust are the ones who'll slip the knife between your ribs while smiling in your face.
So thank you for that lesson, wife.
I've applied it perfectly tonight, wouldn't you say? The police are outside right now, Min-ho continued, his voice carrying across the silent room. Detective Shin has been here the entire evening, witnessing everything that happened, every word spoken, and every piece of evidence presented. You'll both be arrested tonight, tried in court with all this evidence against you, and convicted for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Not by my hand through violence or revenge, but by the law and justice system you thought you could manipulate with money and false death certificates. Min-ho, please, Hannah begged, and now the desperate woman underneath the polished socialite exterior finally showed through. Her perfect facade crumbled completely as she realized there was no escape, no way to talk or charm or manipulate her way out of this situation. We can work something out. We can negotiate. You loved me once, you married me. There has to be some mercy left in you for the woman who shared your name. I married you because my mother asked me to in her last days, Min-ho said, and his voice held no mercy at all. She wanted me to have family, to not be alone after she was gone, to build something lasting with someone who would stand beside me through everything life threw at us. I tried to love you, Hannah. God knows I tried to make this marriage work and be the husband you deserved. But you can't love someone who's hollow inside, someone who sees dollar signs and insurance policies when they look at you instead of a partner and companion. Someone who plots your death while sharing your home and name and marriage bed. He turned to Tae-yoon, who was being restrained by Min-ho's men but still struggling despite the futility of it. And you, cousin, my blood, the man I trusted with my life and my business and my family's legacy. I brought you into my inner circle when we were teenagers running the streets together. I gave you position and power and wealth beyond what most people ever dream of having. How much did she pay you to betray 8 years of brotherhood? Or was it love that made you willing to murder your own family for a woman who's proven she'll kill anyone who becomes inconvenient? Tae-yoon said nothing because there was nothing to say, no defense or explanation that could justify what he'd done or make any of this seem less monstrous. Detective Shin stepped forward then, removing his pleasant party guest mask to reveal the serious law enforcement officer underneath. He was flanked by 4 uniformed officers who'd apparently been waiting outside for this exact moment. Kim Hannah and Park Tae-yoon, he said formally, his voice carrying official weight. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, embezzlement, and attempted poisoning. You have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them? The officers moved forward with handcuffs, and the sight of Hannah being restrained in her beautiful red dress while mascara ran down her face from angry tears was almost surreal. Tae-yoon fought briefly but was quickly subdued and cuffed as well, his expensive suit rumpled and his face twisted with impotent rage. As the police led them through the crowd of shocked guests toward the waiting vehicles outside, Min-ho stood perfectly still and composed, watching his wife and cousin being taken away to face justice for their conspiracy. The guests began whispering frantically among themselves, already spreading the story that would dominate Seoul's society pages for months to come. The attempted murder, the affair, the betrayal, all of it would be dissected and discussed endlessly by people who loved scandal and drama. But Min-ho seemed completely unaffected by their reactions, his focus entirely on watching Hannah and Tae-yoon disappear into police custody where they would await trial and conviction. The party dissolved after that, of course, guests making hasty excuses and departing quickly because no one wanted to linger at the scene of such spectacular exposure and scandal. Within an hour, the mansion was empty except for staff and Min-ho's most trusted men. Petra found herself in the kitchen helping Mrs. Park and the other staff clean up the remnants of the party that had ended so dramatically. Her hands shook slightly as she washed crystal glasses, adrenaline still coursing through her system from witnessing everything unfold exactly as Min-ho had planned. You knew, Mrs. Park said quietly in Korean, then repeated in English when she remembered. You knew what was going to happen tonight. That's why you've been so tense and worried these past few days. You knew about the poison and the affair and everything. Petra nodded slowly, not bothering to deny it. I overheard them planning it 2 weeks ago. I told Min-ho, and he set this trap to expose them legally instead of handling it through violence. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you or the other staff, but he needed complete secrecy to make sure Hannah and Tae-yoon didn't suspect anything was wrong. Mrs. Park reached over and squeezed Petra's hand with surprising strength and warmth. You saved his life, she said firmly. You risked your own safety and future here to save a man you barely knew. That takes courage most people don't have. The Kim family is lucky to have someone like you working here, though I suspect after tonight, you won't be just staff anymore. What do you mean? Petra asked, though her heart knew the answer even as she asked the question. I've worked for this family for 20 years, Mrs. Park said wisely. I've seen how Mr. Kim looked at you these past few days, and I saw how you looked at him. That's not employer and employee looking at each other. That's something else entirely, something that happens rarely, but changes everything when it does. Be careful with your heart, dear. His world is dangerous, but I think he might be worth the risk if you're brave enough to take it. Before Petra could respond, One of Minho's men appeared in the kitchen doorway. Petra, the boss wants to see you in his study immediately. It's important. Petra's pulse jumped, but she dried her hands calmly and followed the man through the now-quiet mansion to the East Wing study. He knocked once, received a response, and gestured for her to enter before disappearing down the hallway. Petra stepped into the study and found Minho standing by the window again, his back to her. Still wearing his suit from the party, though his tie was loosened and his jacket was draped over a chair. The confident, controlled Mafia boss from earlier had been replaced by a man who looked exhausted and hollowed out by the weight of betrayal and exposure and justice delivered publicly. "Close the door," he said quietly without turning around. Petra did so and waited, giving him time to gather whatever thoughts or words he needed to share with her. When Minho finally turned to face her, she was struck by the raw vulnerability in his expression, all masks stripped away to reveal the man underneath who just destroyed his marriage and sent his cousin to prison and exposed his private pain to dozens of witnesses. "It's done," he said simply. "Hannah and Taeyoon are in custody. They'll be processed tonight, arraigned tomorrow, and their trials will probably happen within a few months given the overwhelming evidence against them. They'll both serve significant prison time for what they planned and attempted. Justice has been served through legal channels instead of through violence and revenge." "You did it," Petra said softly, moving closer to him, but not quite touching yet. "You exposed them and stopped them and did it the right way, the way your mother would have been proud of. You should feel victorious right now. But you don't, do you?" "No," Minho admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I feel empty and betrayed, and like everything I thought I knew about loyalty and family was a lie. My wife of 5 years wanted me dead for insurance money. My cousin, who I trusted like a brother, stole from me and planned my murder without hesitation. How do I come back from that kind of betrayal? How do I ever trust anyone again when the people closest to me were the ones most eager to destroy me?" "You start by trusting people who've already proven they're trustworthy," Petra said, finally closing the distance between them and taking his hands in hers. "You start by recognizing that Hannah and Taeyoon's evil doesn't define everyone else around you. Seo and your other men risked everything to help you tonight." Detective Shin put his reputation on the line. Mrs. Park and the staff were loyal even without knowing the full truth. "And she squeezed his hands, "I told you about the conspiracy when I could have stayed silent and safe." "Not everyone betrays, Minho. Some people actually keep their promises and protect the people they care about." Minho pulled her into his arms suddenly, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe as he buried his face in her neck. "Thank you," he said, his voice muffled and shaking. "Thank you for seeing me, for saving me, for not running away when you learned who and what I really am. Thank you for being real and honest when everything else in my life turned out to be lies and manipulation. I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you walking into my world, but I'm grateful for it every day." "I'm not going anywhere," Petra promised, wrapping her arms around him and holding him just as tightly. "Whatever comes next, whatever rebuilding you need to do, I'll be here if you want me here. You've become important to me, Minho, far more important than is probably smart or safe, but I can't change how I feel. And I don't want to." They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd been through trauma and conspiracy finding comfort and safety in each other's arms while the mansion settled into quiet around them and Seoul's night continued outside their bubble of connection and understanding. Eventually, reluctantly, they pulled apart enough to look at each other properly. "I need to ask you something," Minho said seriously, his hands still resting on her waist like he couldn't quite bring himself to let go completely. "After everything that happened tonight, after my marriage being exposed as a sham and my private life being displayed for dozens of witnesses, there's going to be scandal and gossip and probably business complications I'll need to handle. You have every right to walk away from all of this mess, to take the money I'll pay you for saving my life and start fresh somewhere else where my reputation and world won't follow you. Is that what you want?" Petra asked, searching his face for clues to his true feelings. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Minho said immediately, pulling her closer again with barely restrained intensity. "No, I want you to stay more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. But I'm trying to be unselfish here, trying to give you the choice I never gave Hannah. The choice to decide your own future without pressure or manipulation from me. If you stay, you're choosing to be part of my world with all its complications and dangers. If you go, I'll respect that decision and make sure you're protected and provided for wherever you end up. But either way, the choice needs to be truly yours, made freely without coercion. Petra looked at this powerful man who was offering her freedom, even though it clearly hurt him to do so, and she realized that this was what real love looked like. Not possession or control, but trust and respect, and giving someone the power to choose their own path even if it meant they might choose to walk away. This was Min-ho at his best, the man worth saving beneath all the Mafia boss reputation and dangerous world he inhabited. I choose to stay, Petra said clearly, no hesitation in her voice or her heart. I choose you and this complicated life, and whatever comes next, as long as we face it together. I'm not afraid of your world, Min-ho. I'm afraid of losing you now that I've found you. So yes, I'm staying, and you're stuck with me for however long you'll have me. Forever, Min-ho said, and then he was kissing her again, deeper and more passionately than before, pouring all his relief and gratitude and growing love into the connection between them. Forever sounds perfect, Petra agreed when they finally broke apart, both breathless and holding each other like they might never let go. And as they stood together in the study where so many late-night conversations had brought them to this point, both of them knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The end of one chapter involving betrayal and conspiracy, but the start of something new and real and worth fighting for. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, and that made all the difference. The following morning arrived with unusual quiet. The mansion felt different without Hannah's sharp voice directing staff, or Tae-yoon's loud laughter echoing through the hallways. Petra woke in her small room feeling disoriented, the events of last night seeming almost dreamlike until she remembered the weight of Min-ho's arms around her, the taste of his kiss, the promises they'd made in the darkness of his study. She dressed quickly in her uniform out of habit, though she wondered if anything about her position in this house would ever be the same again. When she made her way to the kitchen, she found Mrs. Park already preparing breakfast with a knowing smile on her face. Mr. Kim asked that you bring his breakfast to the study this morning, the older woman said in English, handing Petra a carefully arranged tray. He specifically requested you, no one else. He also said to tell you that your uniform is optional today. Whatever that means, she added with a raised eyebrow that suggested she understood perfectly well what it meant. Petra felt heat rise in her cheeks, but took the tray without comment. She made her way through the quiet mansion to the east wing, her heart beating faster with each step. When she reached the study door, she balanced the tray carefully and knocked softly. "Come in," Min-ho's voice called, and she entered to find him already dressed for the day in casual clothes instead of his usual expensive suits. Dark jeans and a simple black sweater that somehow made him look younger and more approachable than the intimidating Mafia boss persona he usually projected. He looked up from the papers scattered across his desk, and his expression softened immediately when he saw her. "You didn't have to bring breakfast yourself," he said, standing and moving to take the tray from her hands. "I have other staff who could have done this. I thought you might want to rest after everything last night took out of you, emotionally." "Mrs. Park said you specifically requested me," Petra replied, watching as he set the tray down on the side table. Was she wrong about that? No, Min-ho admitted, turning back to face her with intensity burning in his dark eyes. "I wanted to see you, needed to make sure last night was real and not just some dream brought on by stress and exhaustion. Needed to know you didn't wake up this morning and regret everything you said about choosing to stay with me." "I don't regret anything," Petra said firmly, stepping closer to him until only inches separated them. "Every word I said last night was true in the moment and is still true this morning. I'm here, I'm staying, and I choose you, Min-ho. All of you, including the parts of your world that terrify me." His hands came up to cup her face with the gentleness that always surprised her coming from someone with his reputation. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that," he said quietly. "I barely slept last night. I kept replaying the confrontation with Hannah and Tae-yoon, Kept seeing their faces when they realized I'd known everything all along and set a trap they walked right into. Part of me feels vindicated and justified. But another part feels empty, like I've lost something I can never get back. Trust maybe, or faith in people, or the belief that loyalty actually means something in this world. You haven't lost those things, Petra said, her hands moving to rest on his chest, where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. You've just learned to be more careful about who you give them to. Hannah and Taeyoon proved they were unworthy of your trust and loyalty. But that doesn't mean everyone is. Some people actually deserve the faith you place in them, and they'll spend their entire lives trying to prove it. People like me, she added softly. People who see the man you really are beneath the reputation and power and choose to stand beside him anyway. Min-ho kissed her then, slow and deep and full of emotion that went beyond simple attraction or desire. This was gratitude and need, and the beginning of something that felt dangerously close to love, though neither of them was quite ready to name it yet after knowing each other for such a short time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Min-ho rested his forehead against hers. I have meetings today, he said reluctantly. Damage control with business associates, conversations with family members who attended last night's disaster, legal consultations about Hannah and Taeyoon's upcoming trials. It's going to be a long day of dealing with the fallout from exposing my private life so publicly. Do you want me to come with you? Petra offered. Even though the thought of facing Seoul's elite as Min-ho's whatever she was now terrified her. I can be there for support if you need someone beside you. No, Min-ho said, but his tone was gentle rather than dismissive. These meetings need to be handled carefully, and having you there would raise questions I'm not ready to answer yet. Questions about who you are to me, what role you play in my life beyond saving me from murder. I need time to figure out what I want to tell people, how I want to position this, what kind of future I'm offering you before I make any public declarations. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. But I do need something from you today. Anything, Petra said, meaning it completely. Whatever you need, I'll do it. I need you to meet with a lawyer, Min-ho said, pulling a business card from his desk and handing it to her. His name is Young Min-jae, and he's the best immigration attorney in Seoul. I've already called him and explained your situation. Your visa is sponsored through Hannah's name, which means it's now in jeopardy since she's been arrested and will likely be in prison for years. We need to get your sponsorship transferred immediately before immigration officials start asking questions you can't answer safely. Petra took the card, reality crashing down on her as she realized how precarious her entire situation in Korea had become. If her visa was revoked, she could be deported back to Nigeria within weeks, separated from Min-ho and everything she'd built here over the past 3 years. The thought made her chest tighten with panic she tried hard to suppress. Hey, Min-ho said, clearly seeing the fear in her expression. Look at me, Petra. She did, forcing herself to meet his steady gaze. You're not going anywhere, he promised firmly. Young Min-jae is the best, and he's already working on transferring your visa sponsorship to one of my legitimate businesses. You'll have employment and legal status completely separate from Hannah. This is just a formality, paperwork that needs to be filed properly, but there's no danger of you being deported or forced to leave. I won't let that happen. Do you trust me? Yes, Petra said, and realized she meant it despite knowing him for such a short time. I trust you, Min-ho. Good, he said, pulling her close for one more kiss before reluctantly releasing her. Go meet with Young. Get the paperwork handled. And tonight, when all the business obligations are finished, we'll have dinner together. Just the two of us, no staff, no interruptions, no murder conspiracies. Just us figuring out what this is between us, and where we go from here. That sounds perfect, Petra said, smiling despite her lingering anxiety about the visa situation. What should I wear? She added, suddenly aware that all her clothes were either work uniforms or casual items suitable for a student budget, nothing appropriate for dinner with someone of Min-ho's status and wealth. Whatever makes you comfortable, Min-ho replied, his eyes warm with affection that made her heart skip. You could show up in your uniform or jeans and a t-shirt and I wouldn't care. I just want you there, Petra. The real you, not some polished version you think I expect. The real me might disappoint you, Petra said, only half joking. I'm not sophisticated or elegant like the women you're probably used to dating. I'm just a Nigerian girl who worked her way through university and ended up accidentally saving a mafia boss's life. You're extraordinary, Minho said seriously. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time or attention. Now go handle the legal paperwork before Jung thinks I've kept you prisoner here.
I'll see you tonight.
Petra left the study feeling like she was floating, her earlier anxiety about visa issues somewhat soothed by Minho's confidence and promises. She changed out of her uniform into casual clothes and took a taxi to the address on Jung Min-jae's business card, which led to an impressive office building in Gangnam District. The lawyer turned out to be a sharp-eyed man in his early 40s who greeted her with professional courtesy and immediately put her at ease. Mr. Kim called me personally, which almost never happens, Jung said as they settled into his office. He explained your situation and asked me to expedite your visa transfer with absolute priority. That tells me you're very important to him, Miss Petra. More important than he's probably willing to admit even to himself yet. Is it that obvious? Petra asked, feeling embarrassed and exposed. That there's something between us? Let's just say that in all the years I've known Minho Kim, I've never heard that particular tone in his voice when talking about another person, Jung replied with a knowing smile. He's protective of his people in general, but this was different. This was personal in a way that suggests you've become much more than just an employee who helped him avoid being murdered. Now, let's get your legal status secured so you don't have to worry about being separated from him. The meeting took 2 hours, during which Jung explained every detail of the visa transfer process. He'd already begun the paperwork transferring Petra's sponsorship from Hana to Kim Industries, one of Minho's legitimate import-export businesses. Because of Minho's connections and influence, the transfer would be expedited and approved within a week rather than the usual months-long process. You should know something, Jung said as they finished. Minho could have simply sponsored you under his personal name, which would have been faster and simpler. But he specifically chose to go through one of his businesses instead. Do you know why? Petra shook her head, curious about the reasoning. Because sponsoring you personally would have created legal entanglements if your relationship becomes romantic, Jung explained. If things went badly between you, you could be trapped in a situation where your visa depends on maintaining a personal relationship with him, which would give him unfair power over you. By sponsoring you through his business, he's giving you independence and security that exists completely separate from whatever personal relationship develops between you. You'll have legal status in Korea regardless of what happens romantically. That's the action of a man who cares more about your freedom and well-being than about controlling you. Petra felt tears prick her eyes at this revelation. Even in something as mundane as visa paperwork, Minho was thinking about her autonomy and ensuring she had choices rather than being trapped by circumstances or dependence on him. How many men in his position would do that instead of using the visa as leverage to keep her close and compliant? He's a good man, Jung continued, his expression becoming more serious. Despite his reputation and the world he operates in, Minho has honor and principles that guide his actions. He's ruthless with enemies but fiercely protective of people under his care. If he's chosen to bring you into his inner circle, into his life in a personal way, that's not a decision he made lightly. He doesn't trust easily after everything he's been through. So, whatever you're building with him, handle it carefully. His heart is more fragile than his reputation would suggest. I will, Petra promised. I care about him too much to hurt him, especially after what Hannah and Taeyun did. The last thing he needs is another betrayal from someone he's let close. Jung smiled approvingly and handed her a folder with copies of all the paperwork. You're good for him. I can already tell. Now go enjoy your dinner tonight, and don't worry about the visa issues. Everything will be handled properly. Petra left the lawyer's office feeling lighter, one major worry lifted from her shoulders. She spent the afternoon wandering through Seoul's streets, visiting familiar neighborhoods and thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She'd come to Korea as a student with dreams of building an international business career. Now she was entangled with a mafia boss, caught up in murder conspiracies and betrayals, falling for a man whose world terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. As evening approached, She returned to the mansion and found herself facing a crisis she hadn't anticipated. What does one wear to a private dinner with a Korean mafia boss who'd insisted she didn't need to dress up but who probably had standards of elegance she couldn't begin to meet with her limited wardrobe? She was standing in her small room staring at her clothes in frustration when a knock sounded on her door. She opened it to find one of Minho's female staff members holding several shopping bags from expensive boutiques. "Mr. Kim had these delivered for you," the woman said with a knowing smile. "He said you should choose whatever makes you feel beautiful and confident, but he wanted to give you options." Petra took the bags with shaking hands and discovered 3 stunning dresses inside, each in a different style but all clearly chosen with care. One was a simple black dress, elegant and classic. Another was a deep emerald green that would complement her dark skin beautifully. The third was a soft burgundy with subtle details that struck a perfect balance between casual and formal. All 3 fit her perfectly, which meant Minho had somehow obtained her measurements without her knowledge. She chose the emerald dress because it made her feel beautiful and confident as Minho had suggested. She spent extra time on her hair and minimal makeup, wanting to look nice, but still recognizably herself. When she finally made her way downstairs at the appointed time, her heart was hammering with nervousness about this next step in whatever was developing between them. She found Minho waiting in the small private dining room rather than the formal one where last night's disaster had begun. The room was intimate, set for 2 people, with candles and flowers arranged simply but elegantly. He changed into dark slacks and a button-down shirt, looking relaxed and handsome without the intimidating formal where he usually preferred. When he saw her, his expression transformed into something that made her breath catch. "Petra," he said, moving toward her with purpose and intensity. "You're absolutely stunning. The dress looks incredible on you." "You didn't have to buy me clothes," she said, touched but also slightly uncomfortable with such an expensive gesture. "I could have worn something I already owned." "I wanted to," Minho replied simply. "I wanted to give you options and choices, wanted you to feel beautiful tonight because you deserve to be treated well and valued. Is that okay? Can I do nice things for you without you feeling uncomfortable about it?" "When you put it that way," Petra said with a small smile, "how can I object? Yes, it's okay. Thank you for the dresses. They're all beautiful, and this one makes me feel special." "You are special," Minho said, taking her hand and leading her to the table where he pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. "To me, you're the most special person in the world right now. The person who saved my life, who sees past my reputation, who makes me want to be better than what my world demands. How could you be anything except extraordinary?" They sat down to dinner that had been prepared by the kitchen staff, but would be served by Minho himself, he'd explained, because he wanted complete privacy for this conversation. As he poured wine and served the first course, Petra marveled at the domesticity of this powerful man performing such simple acts of service for her. This was a side of Minho she suspected very few people ever witnessed, the man beneath the mafia boss who could be gentle and attentive and surprisingly romantic when given the opportunity. "Tell me about your family," Minho said as they ate. "I know your mother passed away, but you mentioned younger siblings. What are they like? Do they know where you are and what's happened recently?" Petra hesitated, then decided honesty was essential if they were building something real. "I have 2 younger siblings still in Lagos," she began. "My sister Amara is 21 and studying medicine at the University of Lagos. My brother Adeola is 19 and wants to be an engineer. They're both brilliant and ambitious, and they're the reason I'm so desperate to make something of myself here in Korea. My mother's death left us with debts from her medical care, and I've been sending money home to help pay for their education and living expenses. They know I'm working as a housemaid for a wealthy family in Seoul, but they don't know about the murder conspiracy, or about you specifically. I didn't want to worry them when I wasn't sure how any of this would turn out. Do you want them to know about me?" Minho asked, his tone carefully neutral. "About us, whatever we're becoming. Or would you prefer to keep this separate from your family until you're more certain about where it's heading?" "I want them to know eventually," Petra said honestly. "But you're right that I'm not ready yet. This is all so new and uncertain, and I need to understand what we're building before I try to explain it to my siblings. They'll worry if they think I'm getting involved with someone from a dangerous world, and I can't reassure them until I'm confident myself that this is real and worth the risks. Fair enough, Minho said, reaching across the table to take her hand. We'll take this at whatever pace feels right to both of us. No pressure, no rushing, just figuring it out as we go. They talked through dinner about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their very different childhoods and discovering surprising commonalities despite the vast gaps in their backgrounds and cultures. Minho told her about growing up in his father's world, being groomed from childhood to take over the organization, learning to be hard and strategic when all he'd wanted was a normal life with normal choices. Petra told him about Lagos, about the vibrant chaos of her neighborhood, about her mother's strength and her own determination to build something better for her family through education and opportunity. As the evening wore on and they moved to comfortable chairs with coffee and dessert, the conversation shifted to more immediate concerns. What happens now? Petra asked, voicing the question that had been circling her mind all day. With Hannah and Taeyun facing trial, with your marriage publicly destroyed, with everyone in Seoul knowing your private business. How do you rebuild from something like that? Carefully and strategically, Minho replied, his expression becoming more serious. Hannah and Taeyun's trials will take months, and their convictions are virtually guaranteed given the overwhelming evidence. During that time, I'll be restructuring my organization, removing anyone else who might have been compromised by their conspiracy, strengthening relationships with allies who proved loyal during all of this. I'll also be transitioning more of my operations toward legitimate businesses and away from the gray areas that have caused so many problems over the years. He paused, his eyes meeting hers with unusual vulnerability. And I'll be deciding what kind of life I want to build going forward. What kind of man I want to be, not just the role my father's legacy forced on me. Last night proved that the old way of doing things, the path of violence and fear and constant warfare, leads nowhere good. Maybe it's time for something different. Something better. Does that different path include me? Petra asked softly, her heart in her throat as she waited for his answer. Or am I just a temporary comfort while you figure out what you really want? Minho stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face with the tenderness she'd come to associate with his most honest moments. You're not temporary, he said intensely. You're not comfort or convenience or some rebound from my failed marriage. You're the person who makes me believe I can actually be better than what I've been. The person who sees the man I want to become instead of just the monster I've had to be to survive my world. I don't know exactly what the future holds or what shape our relationship will take as it develops, but I know I want you in it. In every way you're willing to be, for as long as you'll stay. That's all I needed to hear, Petra said, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the emotion building inside her chest. Whatever comes next, we face it together. They kissed until breathing became difficult, until the need between them built into something that couldn't be satisfied with just lips and gentle touches. Minho pulled back first, his breathing ragged and his eyes dark with desire he was clearly struggling to control. I want you, he said bluntly. Right now, desperately, more than I've wanted anything in longer than I can remember. But I need you to be sure this is what you want too. Not because you feel obligated or grateful, or trapped by circumstances. Because you actually want me, want this, want us. I'm sure, Petra said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I want you, Minho. I want this. Take me to bed. He needed no further encouragement. Minho swept her into his arms and carried her through the quiet mansion to his private suite, kicking the door closed behind them and setting her gently on the massive bed that dominated the space. What followed was hours of passionate discovery, two people learning each other's bodies and desires with equal parts intensity and tenderness. Minho made love to her like she was precious and essential, taking his time to ensure her pleasure matched his own, whispering words in Korean she didn't fully understand but felt in every nerve ending. The next morning, Petra woke wrapped in Minho's arms with sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked Seoul's sprawling cityscape. She felt different somehow, transformed by the night they'd shared into someone new. Someone who'd made the choice to fully commit to this dangerous man, and whatever future they could build together despite all the obstacles and complications standing in their way. "Good morning," Minho murmured against her hair, his arms tightening around her. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Petra admitted, turning in his embrace to face him. "Everything about last night was perfect." "No regrets?" he asked, and she heard the vulnerability beneath the casual question. He was asking if the reality of physical intimacy had changed how she felt about him, if she was having second thoughts in the cold. "Light of morning." "No regrets," Petra said firmly, kissing him to emphasize her point. "Only excitement about what comes next and how we build this life together." "That's exactly what I needed to hear," Minho said, and the relief in his voice told her how much her answer had mattered to him. "Now, unfortunately, we need to get up because I have more meetings today, and you have the final visa paperwork to sign. But tonight, we do this again. Dinner, conversation, and hopefully a repeat of last night's activities if you're amenable." "Very amenable," Petra agreed with a smile that felt impossibly bright given everything they'd been through recently. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Hannah and Taeyoon's trials became the scandal of Seoul's social season, with media coverage dissecting every detail of the conspiracy and betrayal. Minho handled the attention with characteristic control, giving carefully worded statements through his lawyers while maintaining his business operations and gradually restructuring his organization toward more legitimate enterprises. Petra's visa transfer was approved without incident, giving her legal security independent of Minho's personal involvement. She officially resigned from her housemaid position and took a role in Kim Industries' international division, using her business degree for its intended purpose while remaining close to Minho both professionally and personally. Their relationship deepened with each passing day, moving from uncertain new romance to something more solid and committed. Minho introduced her to his inner circle properly, not as the maid who'd saved him, but as the woman he was building a future with. Some people were skeptical, others were supportive, but Minho made it clear that Petra's place in his life was non-negotiable and anyone who disrespected her would answer to him personally. 3 months after Christmas Eve, the verdicts came down. Hannah was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud, receiving a sentence of 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15. Taeyoon received a similar sentence with additional time for embezzlement and betrayal of fiduciary duty. Both would spend the prime years of their lives behind bars, paying the price for their greed and cruelty and willingness to murder for money and freedom. Minho attended the sentencing hearing with Petra beside him, his hand gripping hers tightly as the judge pronounced the verdicts that would close this chapter of his life permanently. When it was over, when Hannah and Taeyoon were led away in handcuffs to begin serving their sentences, Minho turned to Petra with an expression of relief and exhaustion, and something that looked like hope. "It's finally over," he said quietly. "The past is officially closed, and now we can focus completely on building the future." "What kind of future do you want?" Petra asked, squeezing his hand. "What does life look like for us going forward?" Minho smiled, and it was warm and genuine and free of the shadows that had haunted him for months. "Come with me. I have something to show you." He drove them out of the city to a property in the hills overlooking Seoul, a beautiful piece of land with a partially constructed house that took Petra's breath away with its modern design and stunning views. "I bought this 6 months ago, before everything happened with Hannah," Minho explained as they walked through the construction site. "I was planning to build a house here, somewhere peaceful away from the chaos of the city and my organization's headquarters. A place that could be a real home instead of just a mansion filled with staff and business associates." He stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want to finish building this house, but not for myself alone. I want to build it for us, Petra. A home where we can start fresh, where your siblings can visit from Nigeria, where we can have dinner parties and children running through the halls, and a life that's about more than just survival and power plays. Will you build this life with me? Will you make this our home?" Petra felt tears streaming down her face as the full weight of what he was offering hit her. Not just a relationship or romance, but a real shared life, A future built together on foundations of trust and respect and love that had grown from the darkest circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Min-ho, I'll build this life with you. I'll make this our home. I'll stay beside you through whatever comes next because you're worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth loving with everything I have." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise, while Seoul spread out below them and their future waited to be built. 6 months later, the house was finished and they moved in together, officially making their relationship permanent in ways that satisfied both Korean traditions and their own desires for commitment without rushing into marriage before they were ready. Petra's siblings visited from Lagos, and Min-ho charmed them completely while also ensuring they had the resources and connections to pursue their education dreams. The organization continued its transition toward legitimacy, and Min-ho's reputation slowly shifted from feared mafia boss to respected, if unconventional, businessman. 1 year after Christmas Eve, on the anniversary of the night that had changed everything, Min-ho proposed properly. He took Petra back to the garden where she'd first whispered for him to be quiet, where this entire impossible journey had begun with her courage and his willingness to listen. The snow fell gently around them as he dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring that somehow perfectly captured both Korean and Nigerian design elements, symbolizing the merging of their two worlds into something new and beautiful. "Petra," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion clear in his eyes, "you saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to actually want to live it. You turned darkness into light, betrayal into trust, emptiness into love. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner, and the person I build every tomorrow with?" "Yes," Petra said through happy tears, pulling him to his feet and kissing him with all the love overflowing from her heart. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They married 3 months later in a ceremony that blended Korean and Nigerian traditions beautifully, surrounded by family and friends and the people who'd become their chosen family through loyalty and love. Min-ho's mother would have been proud, Petra thought, seeing the man her son had become with the help of someone who'd seen past his reputation to the lonely soul underneath. 2 years after their wedding, Petra discovered she was pregnant. The news sent Min-ho into a combination of joy and protective panic that would have been funny if it wasn't so endearing. He immediately hired the best doctors, insisted she reduce her work schedule, and generally hovered like she was made of glass instead of being the strong woman who'd saved his life and chosen to love him despite every rational reason to run away from his dangerous world. "I survived helping you expose a murder conspiracy," Petra reminded him with amused exasperation when his hovering became too much. "I think I can handle pregnancy without you wrapping me in metaphorical bubble wrap." "I know you can handle anything," Min-ho said, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "But that doesn't mean I won't worry and want to take care of you anyway. You're carrying our child, Petra. That's the most precious thing in the world to me, and I'll be protective whether you think it's necessary or not." Their daughter was born on a spring morning, healthy and perfect, and screaming her lungs out with a strength that made both parents cry with relief and joy. They named her Grace Min-so Kim, combining their cultural heritages and honoring Min-ho's mother's memory while looking forward to the future they were building together. As Min-ho held his newborn daughter while Petra recovered from delivery, he marveled at how much his life had transformed in just 3 years. He'd gone from a lonely mafia boss trapped in a loveless marriage and betrayed by his closest allies, to a man with a wife he adored, a legitimate business empire he was proud of, and now a daughter who represented hope and second chances and the possibility of breaking cycles that had defined his family for generations. All because one brave woman had whispered, "Be quiet," in a garden and chosen to save a stranger's life instead of staying silent and safe. That choice had changed everything for both of them, had taken two people from completely different worlds and brought them together in the most unexpected and impossible way. And somehow, despite all the obstacles and dangers and complications, they'd built something real and lasting and worth every risk they'd taken. This was their story, Min-ho thought as he watched Petra sleep with their daughter cradled in his arms. A story that had started with betrayal and conspiracy, but had transformed into love and family and a future brighter than either of them had dared imagine. And it had all begun with a whisper in the darkness, a choice to be brave when being silent would have been easier, and two people finding each other when they both needed saving most. Sometimes the best love stories begin in the darkest places, grow through impossible challenges, and bloom into something more beautiful than any fairy tale because they're real and earned and built on foundations of trust and courage and the willingness to fight for each other no matter what obstacles stand in the way. This was that kind of love story, and as Minho kissed his sleeping daughter's forehead and smiled at his wife, he knew with absolute certainty that every moment of darkness had been worth it to reach this light. This perfect, impossible, beautiful light that was now his life.